Welcome to our Social Equity Committee meeting. Let's see, is everybody here? Darren, you are here. Mercedes, you are here. Nikki, you are here. One, two, three, four. I think, so we do have a quorum at least. A few things before we get started. I just want to talk about civility a little bit. Can people hear me? Am I like speaking too softly or anything? You can hear me? Okay, great, thank you. I want to read the original rules of civility that this group approved many, many months ago, and we all can use a refresher for this. And I just would like everyone to sort of approach this meeting with this as their sort of center. It doesn't mean we agree. We certainly often disagree, but I would like to ask people to bring this, just this kind of notion of civility. And they are practice listening and speaking respectfully, share this space, carefully listen to what's being said, come to our meeting centered on the principle that created the Social Equity Committee, speak your truth, but in a way that respects the truth of others. Be willing to engage in honest and meaningful conversation, and do not assume or impose religious beliefs or practice. And that's really just a good reminder for me in everyday life and in every conversation I have, but it's especially critical in these often difficult conversations. And just for the members of the public, I just ask, instead of just raising your hand like this, if you use the raise your hand function, it should be at the bottom. Hopefully it's at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it, there is another function down there, and I see the raise your hand function, but there's another function that if you just play with those, you can tap in and it will allow you to raise your hand. If you are here on a phone, I believe it's the *9 is the raise your hand function. And I'm just going to ask.
To raise your hand.
It is *9. Okay, thanks, Chris. I just ask that you use that. It just makes it much easier. Otherwise, I feel like I'm trolling these photos and I'm missing people, and it's not. And I'm not getting people in order. When you use the raise your hand function, then your photo goes to the front of the line, or to the lineup of the raise your hand functions. And so with that, I am going to ask if Chris, if you could take roll call.
Sure.
Please.
Committee member Toon.
Here.
Committee member Coleman. Committee member Duez.
Present.
Committee member Mansfield.
She won't be here today.
Okay. Committee member Morales.
He probably won't be here today. He had a conflict came up this afternoon, but so if he does come, he'll be late, but okay. He's not here yet.
And then council member Such.
I'm here.
And we have a quorum.
So may I have approval of the agenda?
Yeah, the agenda was posted on Thursday afternoon, the 27th of January.
Okay. I'll move to approve the agenda.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Sure.
Okay. Was that you, Darren?
Yeah, most times you guys have that stuff covered, so.
Thanks. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye. Okay. Okay. I am going to open this now to public comment. Remember, public comment on not before we get to public comment. I'm not going to that. Sorry. Public comment. Remember this. You can comment on anything that is not on an agenda item. So no comments about the resolution, but certainly anything else that you'd like to talk about. And remember, if you please use your raise your hand function. Suzanne. You're
You're muted.
Muted.
Okay, thank
There
you
go.
for the opportunity. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
All right, I just, I know the group has heard from me before, but I just want to reiterate that I'm a retired peace officer. And I wanted to run down some statistics for you. The top most dangerous gangs, not only in the United States, but in the world, just so you have extra information. Number 10 is Costa Nostras, the Italians, the Crips, African Americans, Waching are Chinese, Yakuza, Japanese, Bloods are African American, 18th Street Gang, they're mixed race, they seem to get along. Los Zetas, Mexican drug cartel. Number 3, Aryan Brotherhood. 2, Latin Kings. Number 1, MS-13, Mara Savucha, is a Mexican drug smuggling, black market, gun sales, theft, contract killing, human trafficking, assault, especially on law enforcement. They don't care about any kind of victims, especially kids or women. So you only have like one white group there. The rest are Hispanic and African American, just so you guys know that. And that's coming from a police officer. I've done this research. I think one of the most horrible, notorious ones was on January 6th, crime situations that I read about. Knoxville, Tennessee, Christopher Newman White, his girlfriend Shannon White went out for a dinner date. They never came back. They were carjacked by these people. You can see them. He was had his penis cut off. They were set on fire. They fatally shot him several times. They forced his girlfriend to watch. Shannon was beaten, gang raped many ways for 4 days by all of them. Well, they took turns urinating on her. They cut off her breast and put chemicals in her mouth. In closing, I would just like to say, as human beings, we are capable of good and evil. I respect everyone on this call. Let's just get all the facts and not just some of them. Thank you for your time.
Okay, Tristan, you're next.
Wow, I'm flabbergasted, sort of disarmed by the overt racist comments. But I'm disappointed. The reason I'm disappointed that we don't have a land acknowledgement. When the Miwok arrived here several thousands of years ago,
Always goes second.
or several thousands of years ago, they acknowledged the people that had been here before when they arrived. And we seem to be having a problem with recognizing the history that built this place, that during the gold rush, folks came here for the gold, and settlers came and they liked it. And they said, this is ours. And we gained it that way. It was our manifest destiny. In 1850, the President Millard Fillmore, he authorized treaty commissioners to negotiate with California Indians for treaties of friendship and peace. They succeeded. 18 treaties were signed, including the local Miwok. 2 tribes wouldn't agree, and they were pretty much exterminated, the Awanichi and the Chowchilla. Those in 1851, in 1852, those treaties were not ratified. And in 1853, the state of California issued extermination orders for all California Indians. In 1856, the governor of California issued a bounty of 25 cents for each Indian scalp. In 1860, the bounty was up to $5 per scalp. it went on into the 20th, up to the 20th century. I won't say into the 20th century. There was a raggedy ending. And the acknowledgement that has been enfolded in the documents so far propounded talks about the two surviving groups and doesn't address the whole issue. I think it's, how should I say, overly past due. Thank you.
Thanks, Tristan. Sabina.
Hi, thanks for the time. So once again, I find myself responding to comments of people in the past and this almost at this point willful ignorance of what is being referred to as white supremacy culture. And it's once again, we have sensitive white folks who are wanting their concerns over offending potentially white supremacists, that somehow their feelings over the matter are more important than the reality that those marginalized under the American white supremacist culture has to actually live with. So, for example, trans people. I have been actually a target of trans violence in this town since high school, since moving here. Even in this own committee, I've had committee members here during meetings antagonize me with gender slurs. Lately, we've been having a Proud Boy harassing two Black Lives Matter protesters that are in the park every Sunday. And those affiliated with Suzanne Cruz's anti-vax circle have been contributors to and or been supporters of this Proud Boy and has come out to defend him in public. So we have this group of elderly white people saying that they don't see racism, and that's from willful blindness. And also not going back and listening to the previous videos where definitions like social equity in general, and equality are actually defined. So I find it very inappropriate that these entitled old men are coming in here asking for words to be defined personally for them without them actually bothering to go listen to the hours of video that have come before. And I just want everyone to actually take the time, if you're going to be here, actually participate. Go listen to the previous messages. Go read outside of the meetings. Don't expect everything to be defined for you. This committee has a purpose, and it's not to educate the willfully ignorant who are here on who aren't participating in good faith. Thank you.
Thanks, Sabine. Pablo. Hi.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to comment, I think something that's really important with meetings and just in general discourses.
You muted yourself back, Pablo.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see that I got a mute and then I pressed it. Unlucky timing. Thank you. I was saying, I think it's important this kind of meeting and just in general when talking, right? When we give information, that we cite that information so that we can really kind of talk about, what it is, who it is that gathers that, and for what purpose, etc. So in light of that, I'd like to just provide some information from the Justice Department about some of the more active like gangs, right? And I think there's this really important differentiation between like a gang and a terrorist organization, right? Gangs, we're oftentimes talking about national, kind of lower level. Terrorist organizations, we're talking international, larger level. And so, some of the most active gangs, according to the criminal justice system, citing the Justice Department, would be like I don't know if this is pronounced correctly, but Broderskap, which are Sweden white nationalists. You have the Aryan Brotherhood, which is USA. You have the Nazi lowriders, right? You have the NETA Association. You have MS-13, which was actually created by Berets, American Green Berets that were left alone in South America, right? So like when we're talking about terrorists and like national organizations, they're mostly like, and I mean, I hate to say this, right? But I think it's important that we state the facts. White nationalist and white internationalist organizations, right? A lot of gangs in the United States, there's larger gangs of all kinds of people, but we're talking about the most organized, most deadly. Those are the ones that the Justice Department is concerned with. So, I think really, please, moving forward, like, let's give context to citations. Thank you.
Thanks, Pablo. I do. Mr. Vera.
You're muted, Mr. Vera.
I think it was Mercedes that kept bringing up the American psychology study, making amends for what they did. We really need to look at the backstory behind that. So in the 30s and 40s, there was a big push for eugenics, right? They were sterilizing people that they deemed undesirable. Who were the people behind this push to sterilize people? It was basically the Democratic Party was the party behind eugenics. It's an unfortunate fact. There's good people and bad people of every race and every gender. But you can't demonize an entire race for the actions of a few. The same people that were responsible for slavery, Jim Crow, voter suppression of women and minorities voting. It seems like a lot of people have, maybe cognitive dissonance. They think their abuser is their friend and they defend the abuser. George Wallace was a Democrat, and that was in like 1963. I grew up, I lived in Southern California mainly, and there was a chapter of La Raza on just about every junior high, high school, and college campus. The slogan of La Raza is for the race, everything, outside the race, nothing. There's a couple laws that, back in 1996, we amended the Constitution of California, Section 31, Part A. The state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin in the operation of public employment, public education, or public contracting. For this purpose of this section, the state, California, shall include, but not necessarily be limited to, the state itself, any city, county, and county public university system, including the University of California, community colleges, school districts, special districts, or any other political subdivision or government instrumentality of or within the state.
3 minutes.
Pardon?
Your 3 minutes are up.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak from the public? All right, I don't see anyone else. So let's.
Colette, you have a hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Phone number that ends in 7222. And you're muted.
*9 will unmute you.
There you go. Oh,
I think that was just.
oh, Nathan's here now also. Oh, you're back. Are you able to unmute yourself, *9?
It's actually *6 for unmuting, *9 to raise a hand on the phone.
I'm sorry, *6, I am sorry. That's what was.
Are you able to hear me now?
There we
Yes,
go.
yeah.
Thank you. My name is Ed Greer, and I'd like to state my objection to this committee. I feel like it's a very unnecessary resolution to be stating these types of things of white supremacy and all of that sort of thing. There's plenty of blame to go around when it comes to people blaming each other for offenses. But overall, we have laws that protect each other from these sorts of things. And if we would just take note that all of us are Americans, and that's what really counts. Separating ourselves and dividing ourselves is very harmful and hurtful. And so we can look and see what's been taking place with the woke movement and how cities like Portland and San Francisco, Oakland, Seattle, New York City, these places have been destroyed. The cities have been burned. Businesses have been destroyed, all in the name of standing up for whatever color you happen to be. And that's just not right. And I think what we're doing is treading on the same exact path, what we're doing in Sonora. We need to just stand on our own laws that we already have and expect them to be applied. If they're not applied, then object about it. But at the same time, all of us should respect one another without having to go calling people white supremacists. That's terrible. And the other races have their problems as well towards others. And we don't go around making up laws for that same thing. So I'm really sorry to see that this committee is moving in this direction of Oakland and Portland and all of that in the same awful direction.
3 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, your 3 minutes are up.
Thank you.
Carly Fox.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to voice my support for the committee and especially using the language of white supremacy in the committee. I'm a U.S. history teacher, and I appreciate all the comments paying particular attention to history and thinking about the importance of history. And it's for that reason that I think it's so critical we use this language of white supremacy culture. As those of you who have been coming to these meetings surely know, we're not talking about demonizing individual people or even a particular race of people, but really looking at how structures have operated throughout history in both, as Frank mentioned, the Democratic Party for sure, as well as the Republican Party. So, I imagine that all of us as white folks, those of us who identify as white folks, are confident enough to be able to grapple with difficult and challenging history without becoming so kind of fragile and defensive about what that history might uncover. And so I think those of us who are committed to history, and especially those of us who are committed to these ideas that America has supposedly stood for about not focusing on our differences and being divided, I couldn't agree more, although unfortunately the history of the US has structurally worked very hard to emphasize those differences. And we can just look back to the compromises in the Constitution that were made for enslavers. So it's for these reasons that I think it's so important for us to really grapple critically with that history in a way where we can be a little bit more confident and not become so defensive as some of, I think, the comments made on this call have been indicative of. So really supportive of this committee, and I hope that we will continue to actually name the reality of white supremacy culture and white supremacy history and think about how it's informed our societies, our communities, our education systems, and certainly our laws. Thank you.
Thanks. Jonathan, if you could unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, I love that we have a community that is fighting for individual rights, and so I'm a big proponent of that. I do like the effort, but in terms of trying to resolve how this works and the names we're giving things, the white supremacy culture is a title that was developed by people working towards this cause. So I don't know that it really is a necessary term to push these sorts of solutions forward, but definitely assuring a community that we respect one another and even one another's differences, and that we as Americans are committed to constantly fighting for the rights of one another and individual freedom. But the Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones effort to categorize things like power hoarding as a white supremacy culture item or characteristic doesn't seem to me to be a helpful way to say, we want everybody to be viewed as one, to be viewed as equal, to have opportunity to live life without being bullied and that sort of thing. And when that kind of stuff emerges, the laws exist to deal with it. So I'm not certain. I'm worried about whether we state white supremacy culture, but white supremacy culture doesn't accurately define the issue of power hoarding. That's occurring in Venezuela right now. That's occurring in China right now. So that's, I think, my take on this. Why do we need to use this term white supremacy culture if the characteristics of it are being defined in a way that is simply a humanity issue?
Thanks, Jonathan. Megan.
Hi, thank you. I'll try to keep this brief. I see public comment is going quite a ways here, but I just want to point out that the purpose of this committee was in the beginning to create a resolution condemning racism. And I just find it so ironic that how are you going to write a resolution condemning racism without mentioning white supremacy? If people understand what the definition of racism is, that would be a no-brainer. So I just also want to point out and speak into the space that it's really interesting to look at the voices that are speaking against the phrase white supremacy and who have resistance to this committee and the people who are in support of it. So that's something to think about. Oh, one more thing. People are going to spew data on here. Please cite your sources. Anybody can go on Google and find any data to substantiate any position they want to take. So if you're going to spew data like top 10 lists, etc., please cite the source so that we can decide for ourselves if that's a credible source and not rely on people's just opinions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Megan. So I've said this before, but once again, I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. So, and it is almost 4:30, so I was going to close it to public comment. I'll take one more comment and then we're closing public comment. Phone number ending in 5354.
Yeah. Yeah. I noted the rules of civility. Funny, I thought civility was part of whiteness, being polite and all that sort of thing. Part of that was to not assume or impose your religious view. I don't know how to impose a religious view over the telephone or Zoom call, but for your information, legally, person in public comment can say whatever they jolly well please short of a threat. So that would be a violation of my rights in the First Amendment as far as free speech goes. Incidentally, really religion comes down to a worldview, and everybody here is expressing their worldview. So I'll do that as I please because I get to petition the government for redress of grievances, correct? I've taken the oath of office 4 times. I take it seriously. I think you've done the same, at least as far as taking it. Seriously part, well, might be time to consider that. I have a whole lot more to say, but just let that one sink in, huh? Don't violate my rights. Stop violating my rights. You've been doing it for a while and you're working on doing it more. Back off, please.
Okay, I'm closing public comment now. And back to our work on the resolution. Elisa is not here tonight, so we are actually not going to discuss the statement about white supremacy culture. And we will leave that. It's critical, I think, to the work of this group that we respect everyone's opinion on white supremacy culture. And we have set a precedent before that if a committee member is not present, we don't discuss that because that's our most difficult topic. And it's just fair that everyone be able to participate in that. So we're going to move forward on the work on our table, on our resolution, and not discuss white supremacy culture.
Councilmember Such,
Yes.
just before you go on, there was one thing that came up in public comment that I want to frame because
Yes.
I don't always attend these meetings. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Doug White. I'm the city attorney for the city. So I just want to make sure everybody's very clear, and I do this with all the committees. Each committee has its own jurisdiction, and the city has its jurisdiction, and that's different than the jurisdiction of the county and the Congress and things of that nature. When we make public comment, it is on things that are not on the agenda, but it isn't just anything short of a threat that can be made. It has to be limited to something that's within the jurisdiction of the committee itself, or if it's in the case of the city council, within the realm of the city council. Because this isn't a forum just to say whatever you want. It's a forum to have an opportunity to talk to decision makers in the course and scope of them performing their duties. And so it's limited to, public comment is limited to things that are related to directly or indirectly that the jurisdiction that's been granted to it. So I don't take any issue with what the gentleman said earlier, but because there was kind of an offhand comment, and I always feel like it's my job to make sure that we're guardians of how these things properly function so we can have good functioning committees and councils and commissions. I just wanted to take a moment to throw that out there. And if anybody has any questions, they can always contact me offline or personally too. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug, very much. Okay. Now, we were able last time we completed, I believe, number 6E. But I want to back up to the previous, Chris, could you make Mercedes co-host, please? Right here, yeah. So she can share her screen.
Just did that.
Oh, you just did, okay. Mercedes, if you could share your screen, please. Nikki and I were to work on the language to combine 6A and B, and I looked at that for quite some time. And I would like to put off working on combining those because I think that there's language beyond 6A and 6B, which may take their place or take part part of their place. So just wanted to give you an update about that. And 6D, we said that we we're going to table that to see and just look at that later, because I think many of us found 6D a little bit kind of overreaching. I certainly did. 6E is a repeat also of the language of 6A and 6C. We discussed removing the names of community and business groups and adding, whenever we use the term extremism, that we include, we speak of violent extremism, because extremism is not necessarily a bad thing, but violent extremism certainly always is. So with that, we will move on to 6F. And I think we're going to have some of the same issues with this one. Whereas the city of Sonora understands that this cannot be the work of the city alone, and that we must join as a community with the Tuolumne Band of the Miwok Indians, the Chicken Ranch Rancheria Band of the Miwok Indians, elected officials, law enforcement, business leaders, educational leaders, healthcare leaders, nonprofit organizations, or any other group interested in and committed to creating a racially and socially equitable community. Anyone, first of all, Chicken Ranch Band of the Miwok Indians no longer uses the word rancheria, I believe, so that's not correct. But what do people think about having any of those names in there at all? Any thoughts?
My only, the only thing I wanted to just sort of bring back to the committee is going back to when we wrote our mission and vision statements, we had agreed that any language about the tribes, we would just be, before submitting the resolution to the council, we'd like to present them to the tribes to get their blessing on the language and just kind of partner with them so that we use language that's respectful and has their approval. So I love acknowledging them. I think we have in our whereas statements as well. I think in this particular statement, even though it's presented as a whereas, if I remember right, we moved it down and it should actually be a therefore because there's an action item, but it's quite long, that list, in my opinion. I think it could definitely be much cleaner. But I do, and I think earlier in one of the statements before, we talked about community partnership. I think it was 5L, no.
I thought it was 6A, 6B.
Yeah, so it's kind of still a part of that statement that you and I were going to work on, Colette, about community partnership and engagement without mentioning specific organizations. But I do think that if we name the tribes, it is a way to honor them. But I don't know if this is the right format.
I agree. I found that a little. Mercedes.
I just like to make a proposal, because if we remember what was the process for this table, so each of us created a draft of what we would like to see in the resolution. And later on, each individual draft was put into the table. That is the reason that some statements seems to be repeated, because they are repeated. So right. It makes it a little confusing. So I just like to propose to the committee chair, we have approved part of this table. I mean, we agree in some of the statements, we agree on the tone, etc. So I would like to propose that the chair could put together a draft that compile those statements, and then we can work on that draft instead going back and forth. I mean, the table was very useful, very, very useful in creating conversation, in reviewing concepts, in agreeing in some things or disagreeing in others. And it seems like it's time to have something that has form, and we can move from there to a final draft with the exclusion of the conversation that is pending, and also with checking with the Milwaukees how they would like to be included.
So Mercedes, can you tell me a little more about this draft that you want me to create? Because the statements, the similar statements are all together. So you want me to somehow combine them? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to take those statements that we all have agreed on and put it in the form that we are going to use for the resolution. So, and we can use the table if there is anything that we want to review, but we could start working on the draft of the resolution and not on the table.
And not the table. Okay.
Yeah.
I will say, Mercedes, that we are like
almost at the end.
Almost done with the rubric. We're nearly, I think we just have maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 or 6 more boxes. How would you guys feel about just for continuity, just to kind of finish the rubric and then take what we finalize in the rubric and put that into the draft?
I mean,
just because we're so close.
Because I actually think tonight we very well may finish this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what time it is. We don't have much time.
4:42.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of just keep moving forward, and I will put as much as I can put together for the next meeting. And I'll shoot a copy of that to you, Mercedes, to see if that's what you were imagining. I mean, it makes sense that we're repeating ourselves here because this is all about conversation about working in community. This could not just be this one little committee, but working,
right,
embracing the community and welcoming the community and working with the community and in community input. So, so just on this one, I think. I mean, I certainly think there needs to be a conversation with the tribes just to see where they want to fit in all of this, and we not plug them in where we think they fit in, but if they want any part of this language. So that needs to happen. But anything else in this statement that jumps out at you, knowing that we've mentioned many of these people before?
I definitely think it's along the same messaging as, which one was it? 6A and 6B. And so I think we can combine, because they are all about community engagement and, fostering diversity, inclusion, acceptance. I think we can combine a lot of that language into one therefore statement as the action. And so maybe we add the 6F to kind of our work list, Colette, with 6A and 6B.
Right, but 6C, we actually approved 6C, and that also addresses this.
Exactly.
And I think actually in a sort of an important way.
Exactly. So we don't need to go back to that, like you were saying, we are almost at the end. So what was the next one?
Okay. 6G.
6G.
Therefore, the city will join in community to keep the conversation alive, with commitment to heal the wounds of past and present racial injustice, as well as the current divide understanding that all forms of discrimination are damaging, not only to individuals, but to the economic prosperity and the emotional well-being of our community.
What do people think about that?
Keeping the conversation alive isn't something that we've mentioned before. And as an action item, I think it's impactful. And it should be included.
What about all forms of discrimination are damaging not only to individuals, but to the economic prosperity and the emotional well-being of our community?
Yeah, I think that is the part that is really impactful, because keeping the conversation alive is important and it's vague.
Yeah, true.
You know, so if we are going to be committed to heal the wounds of past and present racial injustice.
We already have that in 3E.
Yeah,
actually.
and it's also a little vague. How are we going to do that? So probably the impact there is the city will join in community or with the community, understanding something there. There is something there that needs to be in the between.
That's kind of what 3E and C were combined.
Excuse me, Devon, let me finish my thought. Understanding that all forms of discrimination are damaging, not only to individuals, but to the economic prosperity and the emotional well-being of our community. That part is like, I think it's so important.
I think that's, I think it's important also. How do other people feel about that? I mean, I could add that, I can maybe try to weave that somewhere else into another resolution. But
Aaron, what were you saying?
Nah, never mind.
Nathan, I don't see your, Nathan, I hope that I'm not ignoring you. Your picture is not on my screen. Are you there?
I'm here. I was, my work schedule changed. I was running late, so I was listening in the car. So I've been listening since about 4:05, but I'm on now, so I'm here.
Yeah, I thought I saw your name. I just am not seeing you on the screen. So I was afraid you were raising your hand and I didn't know about it. So
I will say for 6G, oh, sorry, were you finished, Colette?
I was.
Mercedes, what you were just saying about to keep the conversation alive, that is vague in that context for certain. It might be a lead-in to kind of follow up this therefore statement with the 6B one that Colette and I are working on, with our action plan of what may or may not be that 120-day action plan, because that idea sort of would be the action, right? Is sort of determining what our follow-up is and what that action, those actionable items look like. So if we use that language, perhaps everything in 6G, then in the actual resolution, the next statement might be a nice place to put in our action plan.
It sounds like it would fit very well there, Nikki.
So 6B, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
yeah.
Obviously it hasn't been finalized, but the City of Sonora, in partnership with Social Equity Committee and Community Engagement, will develop a plan within 120 days to achieve intended outcomes and report measurable progress to the community every 6 months.
Can someone remind me, did Jim feel like that was too short of a time frame? Do you remember a conversation about that?
He,
That the one he was.
yeah, I believe he stated that because of everything on the council's plate, that a one time per year, I think was what he had said, once a year or.
Yeah, once or twice. Yeah.
Yeah. But that yeah, I believe he said the 6 months would be too often.
Doesn't seem that often to me, but okay, I will work on combining those. And then I just, this last part are just topics that didn't really have shared language, but people may or may not think is important. Now, condemns violent extremism, genocide, whereas racism, hate, bigotry has no place in our community, and therefore we are committed to speaking out or up against all forms of racism. I feel like that's already, that's been said, I think.
Yeah, at the beginning.
So just X that one. And then the 8 is the number or the comments that are not, that it's not language we have in common, but people may feel is important. One is 8A, whereas the city of Sonora recognizes this is an historic moment to be seized upon and believes the answer to answer this time with silence is to be complicit.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
definitely
think we have to include that.
Any other thoughts? Darren, Nathan?
Yeah, I'm just not sure. I like the idea that if a person is silent, they're complicit. It just seems kind of strong language and vague. I would need to think about that.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure. I think that was mine. And it's just, from my own experience in, and then certainly there are times when silence is appropriate. I think we had this conversation. There are times when silence is appropriate, like when we shouldn't talk about a trial that's ongoing when we don't have the facts and stuff like that. But I think when we're talking about issues of racism and issues of behaviors around it, and not overt racism by any means, but I think we all, not we all, but many of us, and I would argue most of us, have a habit of being silent when people are discriminated against in the workplace. For instance, when we see that people passed over for promotions or not acknowledged, their voice is not acknowledged in group discussions quite as freely. And we watch it, we see it, we know it, and we're silent. And that's, I think, what this is addressing.
Well, sure, that makes sense, especially if there's evidence that that actually occurred. But the problem is, if you're an employee and someone was passed over, how could you possibly know, why that person was passed over? It'd be really hard to be able to prove one way or another, whether it was racially motivated or maybe the person didn't have the skills to be promoted and they happen to be a minority. I mean, that's hard to know if you're on the outside. So I just don't like the idea of, I don't have all the information. I don't have the perspective. I wasn't involved and I'm silent because I don't know. And then suddenly that's complicit. But furthermore, with everyone having a different worldview here, sometimes there are things that people will say is racist and maybe other people don't actually believe it is. So silence is that you don't agree with the way the situation is being handled rather than speaking out against racism. I just think it's very complicated, and it's strong language to say that someone is complicit if they're silent.
Right. The good firm of that is the city council when Ann said something about being a WAP. And no one on the city council said anything. But again, that's open to interpretation of knowing if that was a racial slur or not, or some type of comment that was acceptable and not acceptable. So I think Nathan's onto something there.
I just like to interject there. I think there is ample evidence. I mean, we can talk about our personal opinion, but that is not like what we need to be looking at. There are extensive research that shows that racism exists, extensive research that shows discrimination exists. And recently there was a study done about workplaces, promotions, race, and how that all is related. And that shows that racism plays a role on the fact of somebody being promoted or not. So I think that all our opinions should be respected, but that doesn't mean they are true. To be true, we would need to have similar knowledge and research about where, how, and in what are we basing our comments or our suggestions on. And in this case, we are talking specifically about racism. We are talking specifically about something that is happening. So it seems that when we talk about silence being complicit, in this context is appropriate. But I mean, it's not like indispensable to have it there, but it is appropriate.
I think you're genuine in that it does probably happen, but where can we differentiate between calling wolf and saying wolf and crying wolf versus the realistic term of it? And how do you do that as the city speaking from that? That's more of, I think, what Nathan's getting at, being compliant.
Complicit.
Yeah,
Complicit.
I'm just saying that if we know that racism racism has occurred and we're silent, then yes, then we're complicit. But we have to know that. And I'm not arguing. Well, I'm not arguing that it doesn't happen in the workplace, but I'm saying that if you're dealing with a specific situation, like if I hear, oh, this person got fired because they were a minority, well, that's what I heard. I don't really know the truth, so I'm not going to speak up just because someone said that. And by the way, we do have blatant cases of racism. I think that if you choose, if you hire someone because they are a minority, I think that's racism as well. So I would speak out against that, just as like if you didn't hire someone because they were a minority. So yes, if we know, then we should speak out.
So if I can interject, I think we're getting on a lot of different tangents and losing focus a little bit. So if you think about the context of where we would be reading this statement, it is literally in a resolution condemning racism. So when you know that, that should remove the vagueness because you know what it's about. So I guess that hopefully that can simplify the conversation a little bit to the thing I'll say, the thing that I like about 8A and from a couple conversations from a couple weeks ago, believes to answer this time with silence is to be complicit. It brings to mind the popular quote from Desmond Tutu of the elephant and the mouse, right? So if the elephant sits on the tail of a mouse and you choose to be neutral, the mouse wouldn't appreciate your neutrality, right? So if there is any sort of misunderstanding, or if we want to be really clear as to what we mean, we could just include his quote in the resolution too. And it's 4:59, Colette, if you wanted to take public comment.
Yeah, it's only 1 minute left. Are we closing at 5 or 5:30?
I think 5.
Okay.
The rest of this there are some things that a lot of them we've talked about elsewhere. So I think that I have enough information. I can go through this table and try to create a document and not take too much, not to interject too much of myself in it. I'll try to be pretty fair about everyone's voice and bring it back. to you.
And that's a really huge task, Colette. So if you want to split the work, I'm happy to share that with you.
Let me just sort of I'll have a couple weeks, not just 1 week this time. So let me kind of try to get started, and if I have, there will probably be things that I simply can't combine, or I can't really put it down. So I'll reach out to you guys. So I'm going to open this back up to public comment, and Tristan, actually, you had your hand up first. You had your hand up for a while, so if you would like to speak.
I keep raising it and putting it down, raising it, putting it.
Okay.
Right on to 2-2. I like that kind of thinking, for heaven's sake. I think you are basically crippled by your failure to acknowledge that the city of Sonora rests on expropriated land that was taken, and those who disputed it were driven away or slain. And there was a 50-year genocide committed upon them. I don't think this is something that we're responsible for, but I think we're damn well responsible for acknowledging it and not pretending it didn't happen.
Thanks, Tristan. Now I don't know who is next, Sabina or Pat.
Was Pat.
It was Pat. Thank you, Pat. Hello.
Hi. Well, I just want to say I like the phrase keeping the conversation alive. I think that's really important. I think that's what's been very important about this committee and its 1 year plus trajectory. Clearly discussing racism, both locally and nationally, has struck a nerve in our community. And as everybody knows, there is a national conversation about racism, something people are talking about and have been for the last several years. I do want to say, just remind people that Martin Luther King wrote his famous letter from a Birmingham jail in 1963, and the gist of that letter was urging white clergymen to not remain silent in the face of racism, to speak up. That's it.
Thanks, Pat. Sabina.
Hi. So when it comes to the sorry, I'm totally blanking here. When it comes to the silence in face of wrongdoing or being complicit in it, I'm not sure how we can even begin to try to deny or explain away or obscure that concept when, especially right nowadays, with so many anti-vaxxers enjoying using Holocaust imagery to whine. The Holocaust, the Nazis weren't the majority of the German population. Those who were actually a Nazi member or a member of the Nazi Party was fairly low. It was a marginalized or a minority group of the total German population, except the people that were silent is what allowed the Nazis to grow and foster. And it's not just those who remained silent through apathy, but those who remained silent but still voted for Nazis, those who remained silent and engaged in other anti-Semitic activities, such as boycotting Jewish stores. So it's absurd to even begin, excuse me, my dog's barking. It's absurd to even begin to question if that's a thing. And this whole idea that, like, I don't want to say anything about a coworker getting fired because I don't know for sure that they were fired about race. Like, that's literally the issue. It's that you're not willing to step in and observe and talk to people and check if this hypothetical coworker of color was fired for that. Like, I think in trying to obscure the facts, people on this council are literally proving why silence is complicit, why that language is needed. And it's ironic that it's literally coming from the very Social Equity Council or Committee. Just thanks.
Thanks, Sabine. Mr. Vera, you're next, and then Karen Wood. If you could unmute, yeah.
So violent extremism apparently has quite a few faces in Sonora. I'm looking at a police report where a gentleman assaulted anti-vaxxers. People have a right to not want to be vaccinated without a radical attacking them for their beliefs. And get back.
You're not supposed to be talking about ongoing investigations in these meetings. Thank you.
It's in a paper. I'm not talking about an ongoing investigation. I don't have.
Oh, you remuted yourself.
You've muted. Yeah, you're muted, Mr. Vera.
So also I want to get back to your original council social equity approved outcomes. So you have a guideline that apparently was approved by the city council on what limits and what authority you have. You know, some of it is, there are so many problems facing Sonora and Tuolumne County without, you know, squandering money on issues that are already they're already a law. It's illegal to discriminate against people. It's immoral to discriminate against people. And you know, you don't have any water, you don't have adequate power grids, you don't have adequate sewer plants, you don't have adequate schools, roads. We live in a freaking fire trap. There's only 4 ways out of here. If we do have terrorists setting fires, we're toast, you know, and it seems like the precious resources of the taxpayers of Sonora and Tuolumne County could be better spent addressing real issues that already are covered by law. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. I like the statement about silence and complicity. Obviously, if you don't know something, you can't comment on it. But I think you certainly can ask yourself, why am I not aware? What am I doing to prevent myself from knowing what is going on? If you suspect something, don't have facts, but you suspect, you can certainly enter into a conversation to ask, is there a chance that race played a part in this employee being fired or not being hired or promoted? You certainly can take that action. And then of course, if you know, you certainly need to act or you are complicit. So I think whether you don't know or you suspect or you do know, you're complicit if you're not engaging in trying to find out, because we all know racism exists. And we all know we live in a culture that favors white people. It's how it was designed. And we're making changes and we're improving. Simply that we're having this conversation shows that we're moving in the right direction. But I support that statement being in the resolution. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else for public comment? And just any committee member?
Pablo.
I'm sorry, Pablo. You're on.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, something that I have said in previous meetings, and I think it's worth bringing up again, is, you know, both at the state level, the county level, at the federal level, right? Equity is, you know, being taken as a major issue, right? We have the California State Equity Board form. We have different cities that have equity. So, I mean, equity is the forefront government discussion in the moment because of the necessity to be structural. You know, there is a lot of there's a lot of grants designed for cities to be taken to develop this. There were concerns in one of our board of supervisor meetings about taking some of that money and some of those grants just because of the word equity, right? But the reality is that this is the state's, this is kind of where the state direction is going. We're seeing equity in school and health, in relation to all kinds of things. So I think the earlier we get into it, the more we focus on it, the more resources we, allocate for it, the earlier we are in the wave, right? Like we're already behind some of the larger counties and behind some of the larger cities. So I mean, I just want to really voice my support for that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to close public comment. And now just committee member reports. Anyone have anything they want to report just from their?
I do. So I would like to report that we have been having now for over 3 months conversations at the public library. Everyone is invited. Everyone's opinion is respected. It's conversations to get to know each other, to share about our different concepts, to have common language. And they are the second Wednesday of the month at 4 p.m. and the fourth Saturday of the month at 11 a.m. And it is in partnership with the library. And I would like to add one thing, that we have some people have talked a lot about the laws that already exist. And I would like to go back to the Constitution, that all men were created equal, but what was the context? Who were those men? There was no women, there was no women of color, there was no Black, there was not Native Americans. It was only white men that own property. So yes, there are something there, but what was the context when that happened? And I think we need also to know that in spite of the many laws that have been created, the culture is very strong, and the culture was founded in particular ways. Thank you.
Thanks, Mercedes. Anyone else? Nathan, Nikki, Darren. Anything? No?
I just wanted to add a quick note to kind of circle back what you had mentioned earlier, Colette, about civility. There's been kind of a common theme throughout a lot of our meetings where we hear mostly from public comment that sort of a laundry list, if you will, of things that the city council could be putting resources into that are more important than equity. Things like roads and fires and water. And I would just like to point out that as a woman of color living in a rural community, equity is just as important to me as those things are to you. Living in a community where I'm not discriminated against, and people who have felt marginalized feel a sense of belonging and feel safe is a public health issue and something that we should all be just as concerned about. As a white person living in this community, I fully understand if you have not felt unsafe living here before, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And it doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't have the same skin color as you, who have the privilege of feeling as safe as you do. So if we can be, as an order of civility, just be mindful. It's painful for me to hear that X, Y, and Z is more important. And so if we can just keep that in mind and be a little more respectful with each other as to how we might be, how our experiences might be, and not use our opportunities to tell people that their the things they would like changed are more important than the work that we're doing here. So thank you.
Thanks, Vicki. So it's almost 5:15, so this meeting will shortly come to an end. What I asked committee members to do between now and the next meeting is to review, if you presented a resolution in the beginning, to just go back, well, whether you did or not, actually, just to go back and read all the resolutions that were presented, or all the resolutions from other cities that people put forward, just to review that one last time, because we're kind of getting to the end here. And I would hate for you to read a resolution after we've finalized this, and because we may read it differently now. We have different eyes than we did in the beginning, and we have different, we know more than we did in the beginning. So I just ask that you go back and review those just pretty thoughtfully, and bringing suggestions or concerns to the next meeting. And maybe I'll put that discussion actually on the agenda, so that we have set aside a time apart to actually talk about that. And if there aren't any other comments from the committee, I will say good night.